Hey guys, sorry for the delay on getting these videos out. I haven't had a bunch of time trying to edit everything because I'm working on this car. I'm sure a lot of you can understand, those of you that, work on your cars, work on your own hobbies and stuff, and you film. Editing sucks. Everyone hates editing, but thank you for being patient. Thank you all of you who are still sticking around, and please enjoy the video. So last video, we talked about cutting out the floor in the 240. In order to do that, I need to remove all of the carpet. That means seats, all of this dash wiring, all of the dash structure. Take it all out. It'll be easier just to clear all of the old wiring. Take all the carpet out, cut the trans tunnel, and then move the trans up. I don't have a tripod set up, so I can't film a time lapse for this. But here's it with full interior. And here's it without the full interior. Now I've started taking off some of the sound deadening that's around the trans tunnel. You can see how much it's already been moved up. An easy way to get most of this sound deadening off is to use some dry ice and then hit it with a hammer. But if you don't have dry ice, just try hitting it with a hammer. Most of this stuff just flakes off. I mean, it's super brittle just for being so old. I did take off most of all of the sound deadening that was on the firewall. I still have to get over in that area and figure out how to pull the steering column, but I need to get that wiring out so then I can pull the rest of the engine harness. And then I think in this area, there's another layer of insulation underneath this panel. It's like there was a whole part of the firewall that's put over. So I'm not 100% sure, but when we start cutting along this line, we'll be able to pull it back, see if there's anything there. I would have wanted to stitch weld this, but I think there is something underneath there. I got the rest of the sound deadening in this area out. Also, there's a wiring harness that goes through the fender well that goes then snakes over to all of your ignition system stuff. With all of the dash relay stuff disconnected and all of the ignition switch stuff out, it all went out that hole over there. So I'm gonna go through this, probably simplify it, maybe just pull connectors off and then just run, whichever wiring I need, because I mean, deluming this will help with getting lengths, but it is massive. And with all of the wiring out, I can finally clean the engine bay. Maybe paint it, maybe paint some other stuff. I might not need this heat shield because all the turbo stuff is going to be on that side, so figuring out what to do with that, maybe shortening up some brake lines or tucking them away, getting this foil tape off just so that I can cut the trans tunnel. Once I mount the ESC under the dash, I'll figure out which of these holes I'm going to run it through and then fill the rest of them, all of them. For now, the plan is not going to be having heat or AC, but I will keep all the old boxes just in case. But the big chunk of the heater core does go right up to the bottom of the trans. So if we're moving that trans tunnel up 2 inches, I'm gonna have to modify the box. So I might not have like foot vents anymore, but the main reason why you would probably want heat is coming out of the vents, like the dash vents, just to keep you warm, and then defrost. So that's not, again, not top priority, but I'm keeping all of that just in case. Today's a new day, and it's a great day to get to cutting. It's gonna be a fun one today. It's gonna be loud. Gonna wear some protective stuff so I can actually breathe while I'm cutting stuff. Let's have some fun. First thing to tackle is pulling the trans out. I had an idea that would make it better for me not to be squatting under the car the whole time while I'm trying to pull out or put in the trans, because what I was using was this cart. I would just put the trans on here and then lower the car on top of that. The problem is you need like 2 people or you're gonna be crawling in and out a lot. And over here, we have a trans jack. Perfectly good trans jack. It just doesn't go up that high. It only goes up to, a few feet off the ground. Now, what I can do though, is put it onto this cart. So then I'll have some type of movement up and down. I'll get all this wood and stuff off, but then I'll be able to get under the car at a safer height and probably be able to pull it in and out just all by myself. So that's the plan. Enough talking about it. Let's do it. When I was under here before, the trans was all the way down here. So now I added about 2 feet more room to be able to manipulate the trans. With the trans out, now I can make a plan. So I'm probably gonna cut it along this seam here, and then up and around that harness bar where it is in the interior, and then move that whole plate up along with the firewall section. Move all of that up. But I don't want to cut these off because I was going to cut along this seam, but then I'd have to reposition these trans mounts up and make them level and everything like that. I don't want to worry about that, so I'm just going to cut along this way and then box them up. Okay, so the trans tunnel is marked out on both sides, and time to cut. As you can see, the trans is now cut out. What I have to do next, I'm going to cut and modify this trans mount, or maybe just make a whole new trans mount. But we'll get the motor on this and then we'll put it in the car just to get everything set up on the same plane. And then we'll be able to figure out how high up it's actually going to go and then how far to re-weld that in. And then we can start designing motor mounts. I started going around all these edges and cleaning them up a little bit inside and outside, just so that it's gonna be fine to weld to. The plan for today is to mount the trans back in the car and basically mount these up how it's going to be on the chassis. That mount ends up going on these 2 points here, and then I loosened the 2 bottom bolts that mount this brace to the trans. So then I'll literally just move straight up with the trans about 2 inches, and then we'll take some measurements in the trans tunnel. Basically try and hold the trans at that point, maybe make some bracing, and then slide the motor on so that we can see if we have clearance. With the trans in the chassis, I'm going to check and make sure that everything is level. The problem is though, the rack is not level, or the lift, sorry, and my car is not level. What I can do is try and add more tire pressure into this side, try and level things out. And then from a front to back perspective, the lift is flat this direction. but the car not so much. So maybe I'll put some tire pressure in the back. Also, I'm not 100% sure if this is the best place to measure it because the frame rails are pretty straight up into a certain point where they're kind of crumpled. So not 100% sure where to check level on this, but side to side should be easier. I have a little laser light set up right now, just on the center point of the trans. Looking at the laser, we're at right about 5.5, and we need to be up at 7 5/16, I believe. We need to move up a little bit less than 1.5 inches from this point. And that measurement is from the center point to the bottom of the 13B, and that's to clear this little nub here. I can shave these little bolts down, but I can't change this. From this point up needs to be about 6 3/4. So I am going to clearance the trans tunnel a little bit, but I want to raise the trans maybe 1 more inch, maybe try to tilt it and see if I can actually fit the motor in here first before committing to the full 2 inches up. This was the old transmission mount. It actually had this bar mounted on the bottom, and there was a piece of it that came down and it actually like welded on to this section here. What I ended up doing is I moved the trans up 2.5 inches. I cut these little pieces out and then welded them up in place underneath the car, took it off and finish welded it. But this is just for mocking purposes, so we can actually get the trans in there. I can throw the ratchet strap around it after we trim up the trans tunnel a little bit more. Then we can actually like pitch and move the trans and hold it in place without having to have, you know, the actual jack and everything underneath it. After the trans is up and in its place, we can start moving some stuff around in the engine bay, maybe trim up the power steering rack mounting tabs just a little bit, just to give us some more clearance. And then we'll throw the motor in there, try to make sure that everything is level, everything is straight, and then we can start designing the billet motor plate. And then we will also make this out of billet most likely. The trans is sitting right where I want it to be, and I need to cut off and trim these 2 bolts right here. Sit up enough? Nope, just go up a little bit. So this is Dustin. Say hi.
Hola.
We tried putting the motor in, but we noticed that the pan was hitting the rack bolts a little bit. So we cut those off, trimmed them, and raised the trans a little bit, centered it. Time to get the motor back on.
See if it fits.
Yeah. For some reason, we're not getting all the way in. Not sure if it has something to do with the pilot bearing, but it's not going all the way in. After struggling a lot, we're still not in, and the main reason is right down there. So right here you can see the middle iron is making contact with the steering rack. So we're gonna have to shave some things and get it to push back probably the last 1/4 inch. Maybe we can move the trans forward a little bit. But that's the situation right now. Yeah, you can see how close it is. We tried starting some bolts, but it's still like really not going onto the splines. Tomorrow I'm gonna pull the motor, pull the trans, try and get them to mate together, not in the car, and then go from there. The engine and trans are mocked up. We just need to press this in with the mallet. Since these dowels are pretty new, it's a very snug fit. I am going to end up pulling this plate off, or at least trying to reposition it, because this gap in here, I feel like when we try to draw this in even more, it's going to get stuck. And right here you can see, just cut that little notch out so it doesn't hit the steering rack.
Good. I always feel like we're gonna hit. Huh? I always feel like we're gonna hit the flange. It's over. There you go.
There is the motor. It is in the engine bay. It is mounted up to the transmission. The engine is centered, but the trans is not, so we need to adjust that trans mount a little bit, get our proper tilt and everything like that. But right now we can start designing some motor mounts off of the front cover to each one of the subframe mounts. The trans is now centered in the chassis, and so is the motor. It's just tweaked a little bit, rotated clockwise, but this is how far out it was. So now time to drill new holes and then design new mounts. I took off this little inspection plate, and here you can see the tilt-in throw-out bearing is in there. The splines, this huge clutch, flywheel, everything in there. And it like barely doesn't hit anything in here. I'm not sure if you can see the castings in there. It's like, oh, really close. But it's sick. It's in there. It's not hitting anything. I don't know if it's just me, but I like seeing how all that stuff moves and how it interacts with each other. It's just me nerding out, you know. So if you can see in here, the spacing between this rack mount and where the oil pan will sit, and this rack mount and where the oil pan is sit, is basically the same right now, and they're not supposed to be. So the motor is sitting a little bit tweaked. Gonna rotate that, get some proper spacing in here, then I can start designing off of the motor mounts that will sit there. I have these polyurethane mounts, just some generic ones for KA-SR. This side I'm not too worried about. The alternator goes right there, but there is plenty of space in between this part of the subframe and the engine. But on this side, it's right by where the exhaust will come out. Even if I try moving this up, it's still really close. So I'm probably going to cut this in half, just so we have some type of a bushing in there. And then I can design off of the front cover. Ryan had some of these little plastic washers laying around, these little spacers. And what I ended up doing was I threw two of those little guys right in there to space it up from the rack. And what that ended up doing was made our motor level. All I need to do now is make sure that the motor is centered. Then I can design from the front cover over to each side of the subframe and design that motor mount. So on this back iron, I attached the angle gauge, and as you can see, I'm at right about 2 degrees on the motor. I meant to say 3 degrees. I couldn't really see the gauge. But over here, on the diff pinion, you can see that I'm at right about 2.5 on this as well. And I'm not hitting anything. So the way that the diff is tilted up slightly and the motor is tilted up slightly, I don't have to raise this trans mount at all, which is awesome because it barely fits in this back portion of the trans tunnel already. I threw the hood on real quick just to see where everything fits, and you can see the motor just barely fits under here. I am going to have to cut some of this inner structure out because that's our strut bar. It goes from one side to another. Also, I'm not 100% sure that this is sitting where it's supposed to be. It probably sits up a little bit higher than this. It's just resting on my little bump stops right now. Once I get the headlights in and the fenders on, I'll have a better idea where to position the hood. But for right now, it's just good to see and make sure that everything actually fits. On a 240SX, this is essentially how the front core support looks, other than mine being cut off and just put on there for now. And then you have the radiator sitting behind that. And these two posts, that's where I had my intercooler. Now, if we look in here, I have a lot of space in this area. And my idea is to do this. This is sort of my idea. So I'm gonna have the intercooler in here laid back. Right now it's just resting on the stock inlet and outlet ports. What I'm probably going to do is have some type of exit coming off of here. Or I was thinking maybe even I probably have room underneath this. So there's multiple ways that I can route intercooler piping and stuff like that. I'm gonna try and make this setup work. I really like how far back everything is out of the way of everything. But it's gonna be figuring out what actually works and what I can get away with. Before we continue plugging away on this, I already made some mounts for the bottom of the intercooler. I'm gonna do intercooler and then radiator. I have to fix the infinity table. So if you've seen on any like welding Instagrams or any fabrication stuff, even into Reddit, Facebook, all of that stuff, that's this table. That was before it was painted, well, not painted, powder coated, fully welded. But this was made in too thin of material for what load it was supposed to be carrying, and it ended up cracking. This is, I believe, 16-inch thick. It was supposed to be 1/8 inch thick. This is 2x2 square tubing, cold rolled steel. And this is over 52 feet long of material. Now the main issue why these like main corners start to crack is because they carry most of the weight. So I believe, yeah, this is the bottom side of it. So that's the bottom frame. And then these two legs here are what carry everything else. So there's a lot of stress that goes off of that back corner there. I do have some acrylic that I'm going to put in these high stress like areas, and that way it will stop from bouncing. Like if you look at this, it just moves like crazy. So that will stop it from moving a ton. Once I get these welded out, then I can get it all sandblasted and then re-powder coated. That is all welded up in there and in those two corners. So time to finish up mounting up the intercooler. On the intercooler, I made these two brackets, and they come out at a 45, and then they go up almost at a 45 as well. And what that does is that goes to my nutserts that are in here, that goes under the frame, and it latches on down there with 2 M8 bolts. And then this bar that I just welded up, that will go up, and then on the other side, I have bungs, threaded bungs that are like this on the other side, and those will then go to tabs that are welded to this. Then I'll have 2 tabs that come up, and that will be for the radiator as well. These pieces of 90-degree angle iron have riv nuts in the frame, and then it's 2 bolts that go down, and then it's welded to this bar. And you can see we have plenty of space. This is very, very strong. I can push and pull the whole car. It's mounted to the frame on both sides, gives it a little bit more structural rigidity, and it's nice and level. The only real issue that I can possibly see is where the intercooler piping comes out. It might be close to that bar. From under here, you can see we have enough clearance for the bar. This is where I'm planning on having the tube come out. I don't want it to go through the fender well. I could possibly have this go up, but I was thinking of making oval tubing here. I could do pie cuts and have it come out and around. The only problem is you can see I don't really have a bunch of room to come out straight because it'll hit this bar. I got some new bolts that are a lot shorter than these old ones. There's a little bit of this section that isn't threaded, and that was hitting and bottoming out on this plate. So through these little bungs here, it couldn't go in as far as I needed to. I didn't want to take that up by washers, because if I pull it off and the washer falls off, then I can't put it back on and I might damage the threads, or this aluminum typically isn't that strong at holding threads, so I didn't want to chance it. So I got some new bolts, and the template that I made for the brackets that are down there is this little guy, and this hole size is the same size as this, so I'm just going to reuse this template, bend it a little bit, get the angle that I need, and I'll make a bracket for here and for there. As you can see, these two little brackets are welded on. This thing is not going anywhere. Gonna chop the ends of these off and probably position them out like this, either really stubby or straight out, just to give enough clearance to get to this bolt. I don't want to have to use a wobble socket, but if I need to, I will. Probably just cap them off right there, give me enough room to go out with it. If I have to, I'll go underneath, but that'll be a lot of work with oval tubing and whatnot. But for right now, it's in place. Now I just need to mount up the radiator. The next thing to do is to mount the radiator, and the problem is the radiator isn't symmetrical. So here's the radiator, right? This side here versus this side is thicker. So from this weld to here is about 1 inch. From this weld to here is about 1.5 inches. Here to there is going to be the same as here to there. Here to here is the same. Here to here is the same. But from here to here and here to here is not the same. So the whole area where the air comes through is actually shifted over. If I set that center, the whole radiator would be shifted over. If I move that to where this centered line is actually centered with these two holes, then the radiator is actually centered. So right now, how this zip tie setup is, the whole radiator is set over. You can see that. Those two lines should occupy the same space, but they're not. So I need to bring this over about 1/2 inch. And then, once I have that figured out, then I can do the fun task of trying to figure out, you know, how this is positioned this way. But I can at least make the front core section because it should be symmetric. Once I set the height and everything like that, then I can mess with the back, get that centered where I want. Then at that point, I'll be able to make the tabs that mount to this crossbar hoop, and then the radiator will be right where it needs to be. That might have been kind of hard to follow. My brain's just moving really fast. I was just trying to figure it out, trying to get it knocked out really quickly so that this can be done. Because once this is done, I can actually figure out like where I need to cut stuff, where I need to start plumbing the turbo and everything like that. So let's get this knocked out. My plan for the motor mount for the 13B, I designed it, I got all of the, like the rack, everything in place in CAD. I designed the whole thing. It'll be cut out of billet aluminum on a 5-axis machine. I could get it made out of all one piece or 3 different pieces. 3 pieces would actually be cheaper. But in the meantime, before I get that cut out, because I do have access to a 5-axis, I designed one to be made out of plate steel. So I got this package here from Send Cut Send, and these are the, you know, pieces that I had designed, and then this is the cold rolled steel plate. So this was either cut out with like a plasma cutter or a water jet table. I'm not 100% sure, but this is really sick. So let's get this out of the packaging and then see how it mounts up on the motor itself. So now to test fit this onto the motor. I gotta pull this out of the way first. Just like that, it's out of the way. Time to test fit this bracket onto the motor. Now, I haven't test fit this before. I have measured this like 100 times, and let's see how well this fits. Okay. Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's perfect. I know it's just a piece of plate with holes cut out of it, but that's awesome. I mean, I designed it, and theoretically it should work, and it does work, and that's just... I'm freaking out. Freaking out. All right. Anyways, let's get back to it. We need to order up more tubing for this structure here. I want to get it made out of this tubing, the same size, but I don't have enough of it, unfortunately. I think this is the longest piece that I have left over, and yeah, we're missing some space on each side. So unless I find some laying around the shop, I'm gonna need to get some more of this. So I realized, just got back to the shop, I forgot to grab the starter. I wanted to throw the starter in just to trim up the floor a little bit, make sure that everything fit. Yeah, forgot that. But I did grab my backpack, so I have all of my stuff to measure, and I have my laptop. So we can figure out this mess. We'll do that right now. I got a bunch of designing to do. It's probably going to be a late night here. I'm going to call it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. If you're not subscribed, please hit that bell down there. Turn on your notifications so you know when I post. I'm really bad at posting, so if you want to look at my linked profiles and just keep bugging me and asking when I'm going to be putting out a video, that's going to give me motivation to actually edit a video and put it out. But yeah, so comment anything that you have questions on, anything concerns, anything you just want to know. There's a lot of stuff up here and not a lot of stuff comes out here. So Thanks again. Later.